Hey there, my name is Shelby Hutchins. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the psychological characteristics of Division I FBS athletic directors and how those correlate with athletic department success. A little bit of background about collegiate athletics. I'm sure many of y'all study it, but it's as college sport is increasingly commercialized and becomes worth more and more money with name, image, and likeness coming online, and with sports betting coming online, athletic departments are ever more at the focal point of the public conversation, right? They're ever more in the eye of the public. And as such, athletic directors and collegiate athletic departments generally have to be a whole lot more particular about the things that they put out and the product that they put on the field and on the court every year. In charge of those efforts are Division I athletic directors, often blamed for or praised with the success of the department. They're seen as CEOs to some level, but we don't know a whole lot about them, right? There have been a few different studies assessing leadership theory, but a few studies on values, but not within the context of athletic department success. So we're going to take it a step further today and take a look at values, what values are, and how they function within the behavior of an individual. Before we get to the level of the individual, though, we need to understand, at least theoretically, how the characteristics of one person can influence the outcomes and performance of an entire organization. That's through this upper echelon theory, where Hambrick and Mason described the process of an organizational leader and their characteristics kind of trickling down through an organization. Organizations are to some extent an embodiment of their leaders, and specifically the personality characteristics of their leaders. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. To that individual level, personality in terms of traits and values kind of work together in a lot of ways. Personality more refers to the ways in which one acts on a regular basis, whereas values are these kind of motivational priorities, right? All in the context of setting a goal, working towards that goal, and eventually achieving that goal, right? So let's further break down this relationship between values and traits. One of the biggest limitations to any personality research, personality psychology research, is the influence of the particular context, the influence of the particular situation. Traits and values are both pretty stable over a lifetime, but again, each context kind of brings out unique behaviors that the value or personality trait might not exactly account for. Values tend to be prescriptions for what a person should do rather than what they tend to do, which is what a trait is. And values are supposedly, at least based on literature that's been produced thus far, values are more relevant in issues of behavior under voluntary control, right? Whereas traits are more impactful in situations when there's less cognitive control involved. So setting your goals, setting the direction in which you want to work as an organization, much more likely to be based on the values than any given trait. Now, the way in which you go about working towards those outcomes is probably more related to personality traits. Most popular theories of each, you've got the Schwartz theory of basic human values, which we're going to talk about today. And in terms of traits, you of course have the big five and its facet and aspect scales as well. So sources of values, I'm sure we can all name a few, right? Family, religion. There's evidence that there's some component of values that's genetic. And then, of course, the workplace, right? Your work context is going to dictate the values you act upon, at least to some extent. Likewise, the occupation you choose is probably also based on your values. These are the 10 values, and you see also 4 higher order values there. Within each higher order value, you see 2 to 3 different value types. Those are the value types that we're going to be assessing today. And within those higher order values, there's a closer statistical relationship between those 3 or 2 values. A couple of examples here. Those that value self-direction, for instance, appreciate autonomy, appreciate independent thought and action, like to be independent, very much like to go do things on their own, whereas someone who appreciates conformity, appreciates rules, appreciates structure, appreciates the natural hierarchy of things. So how do those function within the workplace? Well, it wasn't until 2008, and there's been a few studies since then, but this 2008 study paints a really pretty picture of it. And it described the relationship between values, culture, and outcomes. And they found that values can predict organizational outcomes, and values themselves are, I guess, indicated by the behavior and the words that individuals use, CEOs in this case use in the workplace. And they found that values like self-direction is positively associated with sales growth, values of security is positively associated with efficiency, benevolence values are positively associated with satisfaction. Likewise, the mediator in between the two is organizational culture. So self-direction predicted an innovative culture, which makes sense, right? You're providing your employees with autonomy. You want them to make decisions. You want them to feel confident and independent in their decisions. Security values are associated with a bureaucratic culture, so making sure things are orderly. We've crossed our T's, we've dotted our I's. And benevolence values are associated with a supportive culture, which again makes pretty perfect sense. But what about athletic directors themselves? Who are they? What do they do? They're kind of an enigma in the world of organizational leadership. So 2016, there was a great paper that really broke down the similarities between athletic director job responsibilities and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right? They found that both have to account for all of these different facets of the business organization, right? You've got marketing, you've got accounting, you of course have revenue generation, which we'll talk more about here in a second, employee management. But on top of all that stuff that CEOs also have to do, you also have this emphasis on compliance, and you have this academic piece that's kind of the wild card thrown in there in Division I athletics. And because of all of these different job roles, they're a really difficult population to study. And because they're a difficult population to study, there's really not much out there aside from what is publicly available, which alludes to our methodology that we'll talk about here shortly. More on D1 FBS ADs. Again, more likely to work for a Fortune 500 company than ever played sports. That's a newer trend, but gone are the days where the superstar athlete comes home to serve as the athletic director. You instead have these individuals from the business world coming into collegiate sport, realizing that they're very, very similar and being successful in collegiate sport. The trend generally is also for ADs to have an AD gig at a Group of 5 institution and then graduate to a Power 5 institution, maintaining the role of athletic director from one to the other. You see that initial contract length of 5 years. That's of course been decreasing with the increase in competition. I expect we'll see that continue to decrease as the years go on. 2016 study took a look at what athletic directors thought were the most important and least important facets of their job. He found that revenue generation and crisis communication were the most important. So we just talked about how revenue generation is certainly one of the factors. Crisis communication as well, right? Nothing can ruin the reputation and image of your institution like an NCAA compliance violation or like some sort of scandal. Least important, student athlete development and academic services for student athletes. Perhaps those two are somewhat disheartening for those of us who work with student athletes on a daily basis. In terms of success, collegiate athletic departments generally, it's easy to think in terms of wins and losses, but the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics has this ranking system where they assign points based on the finish of a school in a championship or in a final ranking in the case of D1 football. And it assigns a point value to each, right? So you get an idea of how each institution's doing in all 19 sports that are measured within this ranking system. Now, that's not saying that this is the only thing that institutions should aim at, but it is a mutually agreed upon measure of the success of an athletic department. So this is what we're going to use. We're going to use this ranking as our dependent variable and use values as our independent variables. A 2012 study addressed the variance accounted for by financial allocation and was able to explain 65% of the variance, but the scoring structure's changed since 2012. It'd be interesting to replicate this study now and see what happens, but the scoring structure is a little bit different now. And besides, we need to understand that more psychological side of things anyway. So interesting study here. Again, might not replicate the exact same way now, but gives us some food for thought in terms of financial allocation. So our research questions. We're going to address the values of athletic directors through two different ways. We've got a manifest analysis and a latent analysis. The values that are most frequently mentioned versus the values that are perceived from these athletic directors through introductory press conference transcripts obtained from YouTube using a transcription software. Again, the introductory press conferences are important because they are the first time in which we get to hear the platform of the particular athletic director. We get to hear their stance, we get to hear what they think, we get to hear where the program is going to be headed under their direction. And it allows the public to really assess what it is they have and allows the athletic director to identify his or her priorities and their values, which again, we've identified as critical for organizational performance and organizational success. They're also a chance for these institutions to manage their reputation, manage their image. We can tell a lot about an individual from the things they say and the way they act in a given context. Examples A and B here, those of you that are big NFL fans, Dan Campbell's press conference versus Nick Sirianni's press conference, right? One inspires confidence and one does not, right? Sorry for you Eagles fans out there, but we can tell a lot. We can learn a lot about a particular individual and the values that they hold through the words they use. So RQ1 is our manifest data analysis. It's a summative content analysis. Basically just counts which values are mentioned and how many times they're mentioned. The theoretical impetus there is that the more often something is mentioned, the more important it might be. As we'll see with the latent analysis, that might not exactly be the case, but generally that's the stance that summative content analyses takes. We used in vivo the text search function for exact match, just so we didn't have any uncertainty about what it was we were assessing. Results from RQ1, we saw achievement mentioned the most, stimulation second most, and conformity the third most. So remember, whenever we were talking about conformity, we were talking about the importance of NCAA compliance. We were talking about following rules, structure, things like that, right? Which makes sense, again, if one of the most important aspects of athletic director jobs is crisis communication, right? Likewise, stimulation. Of course, they're going to be excited. They're going to be excited. They're going to be in a new place. They want to be able to invoke their culture. They want to be able to develop their programs in a way that benefits the university. And lastly, and perhaps the most obvious and to be expected, is that of achievement, right? They all want to win. They all want to be successful. That's a given. So Interesting that these three values popped up, maybe not so surprising, but interesting that these three values popped up. But let's see how that compares to our second data set. Our correlation analysis, I had a group of raters use the Schwartz PVQ-40 items as you see there. We did a pilot test, got our reliability analyses, and then we correlated each value with the NACDA ranking. And this is what we found. Super, super interesting. Self-direction was our strongest indicator of, our strongest correlation with the NACDA ranking, right? So autonomy, this is all very, very similar and relevant to the current personality psychology research. Those that are successful typically exhibit a high internal locus of control, so independence, self-direction. Those that are open to new experiences, stimulation, also a significant predictor, and also closely related to self-direction, right? We can also relate the findings here back to the extant literature on personality traits in organizational psychology and the traits associated with those that are successful. And we see that self-direction, the value self-direction, the value type rather, is significantly associated with the personality trait of openness, right? Being open to new experiences. Stimulation is also very much significantly associated with openness, and it's also significantly associated with extroversion, right? So really interesting findings there. It makes sense that athletic directors would tend to be more extroverted, as those who are extroverted tend to do well in management situations. So interesting findings there. But practical implications of this study, hopefully we can use some of this to inform our hiring practices of ADs going forward. There's not a cure-all, there's not a panacea for who to hire, how to hire them. And it seems like the money that's being spent on these hiring searches is a lot, but there's also, of course, a lot at stake here. It also just might be a risk mitigation tactic more than anything else. So hopefully by kind of including values in some of these hiring search equations, we can find better fits for ADs and institutions alike. Likewise, being able to develop a greater understanding of the underlying psychological factors that contribute to successful leadership in collegiate athletics is really, really important. As it continues to get commercialized, the differences between those institutions at the top is going to get smaller, and being able to identify those differences is going to become more and more important, and values just might be one of those differences. It can also help us improve our discussions on leadership and sport research for the aforementioned reasons. And then I'll leave you with these 2 points. Hopefully we can get some more direct access to athletic directors in the future and be able to assess both values and personality traits, and even aspects and facets of those personality traits. I think that'd be super fascinating to see, and to see how that aligns with their public persona. We should also be cognizant of everything the public isn't aware of, right? Those of you that have ever played water polo, the referee in water polo is out of the pool and above the water, right? All the cheating happens under the surface. And collegiate athletics, not to be too cynical here, but collegiate athletics might be very much a water polo-esque situation in which we might never really know what it is that happens and what it is that accounts for some of the differences we see in success in collegiate athletics. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it.